Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me join you. And I just wanted to echo Farah's appreciation for this presentation and the panelists and the content. I have been watching all day, and I've been really blown away by the information and perspectives that have been shared. So, to give a little bit about me, I am not a tech expert. I'm probably very much so the opposite. My background is in social work and psychology. And but before that, as a 17-year-old, I was recruited into and joined the US military. I served from 94 to 2004 as an Arabic linguist and military intelligence. And I could say that over the course of my time in the military, I definitely saw some things changed that gave me cause for concern, and the way that surveillance has increased and the way the power of the government to intervene in the lives of not only people and governments around the world, but within the lives of citizens here in the United States. And for example, when I joined the military in 94, I went to the language school to learn Arabic. It was an absolutely wonderful experience. All of my instructors were native speakers from all over the Middle East, and I learned a lot about the history and culture of their community. And when I got to my first active duty assignment in 1996, we were listening to radio communications. This was honestly, although I had some experience using computers as a child and within the military for communication, this is before I really became aware of computers and how widespread they were going to be in terms of being involved in our everyday life. And so listening to military radio communications of various countries totally made sense to me. It kind of fit with being in the US Army. So fast forward to 2001, I was activated after the events of 9/11. I had really honestly hoped our country would respond differently to that day. I think it was, for all the reasons we all know and are aware of, the worst possible way that we could have responded in terms of war. Um, but by then, technology had advanced, and instead of listening to radio communications via satellite, we were listening to satellite phone communications, and that included conversations between people in the United States and people in Iraq, Afghanistan, and that area of the world. And I saw myself that the rules of the military were already starting to be bent. So prior to 9/11 on active duty, the military is not supposed to be listening to US citizens. We're not supposed to be listening to citizens of our allied countries. And after 9/11, those rules were bent further and further to the point of non-existence. So I thought it was problematic, but I didn't really think about it in the broader framework of, the transformation of our society and how the government was keeping up with the technology and how it could best use it, until I went to a US social forum and witnessed a presentation not unlike this one, not dissimilar to this one, where they talked about the surveillance programs and our need to be concerned about the way they were being used. And I can only say that, it's been brought up that there's so much information out there. What does it matter? What does it mean? But there are just so many ways that in order to keep up with the volume of intercepts, that I could already see, problems with how information was being analyzed. So for instance, when we were bringing in all these phone numbers, we could also track what numbers called what numbers, and people were making these trees of how phone numbers were attached to one another. And, even I then was thinking, I mean, this was, past the 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon. You can only go, I think it's what, 6.5 people is what separates me from anybody on the planet. And so it caused me concern in terms of the decisions people were based on phone numbers being linked to or tied to one another, in terms of what that meant about you, and what that meant about the people you were calling, based on perhaps one person who might be a subject of interest. So at any rate, is tons to be conserved of in terms of our privacy and surveillance in this country. And I want to go a few steps further. So, in my work as a counselor and a psychologist, I spent several years in the area of mental health and working with veterans. And it all, for me, it's like this dialogue where I can think through of eras in my life and how technology somehow touched all of them. And I never really thought about that until watching people talk on during today's event. But for instance, when I was in the military, we were first talking about drones. And I was so naive. I didn't think that the military would ever use drones, because I couldn't conceive of them being good enough to know who you were targeting and that it was the right person, and the accidents wouldn't happen. But lo and behold, we all know that drones are used, and they're used in an ever increasing basis. And some would say that that is okay because it keeps soldiers and service members out of harm's way. But on the other hand, there are numerous studies that are looking at the mental health of drone operators and the impact it has on somebody to be thousands of miles away from somebody and pushing a button on a computer that can impact the life and death of other people. And that weight plays on people and plays on their mental health. It's not, I don't know. They say that, technology is supposed to make life safer and easier. And I think one of the questions posed earlier is, do we need technology to do everything? And I would say no. That doing things is part of our humanity. And, I've read articles about the more we use technology to do our everyday tasks, the more we all have to go to the gym in order to get exercise, because all those things we used to do as people, we no longer do anymore. And how do we then figure out different ways to get activity in our lives? But there are a couple other things with the minutes that I have left, and I know we'll have a presentation panel discussion after this as well. But about the work that Veterans for Peace is doing. So in 2007, I had been out of the military for about 3 years, 2 years, 2.5. And I was very keen to see the United States get out of Iraq and Afghanistan and try figuring out what we could do to make the world an actually more peaceful and safe space. The Democrats were elected, they were given back the control of Congress, and many people viewed that moment as a referendum, a public referendum on our drive to withdraw troops from Iraq. And instead of going through with that in 2007, that January, the Bush administration announced that they were going to escalate troop presence in Iraq, and the Democrats signed off on it. And that was my breaking moment. That was when I decided to get on a bus and join a demonstration in DC saying enough was enough and to withdraw troops. And that was the day I joined Iraq Veterans Against the War. I've been doing veterans peace work pretty much ever since then, now with Veterans for Peace. And there are a few ways in which our work now ties into this topic of ethics and technology. So for instance, many people are aware of the climate crisis we're facing in this world. And it's something that people have been ringing the bells about for decades. But with each passing day, it seems like the climate crisis is becoming more and more real and tangible to people around the world. And all of my um, outreach and talk with people who are concerned about the environment, it's become aware to me and other veterans that not many people know about the role the military plays in today's climate crisis, just in terms of resources used, um, pollution. The military has never had to fully divulge its emissions. Um, the idea that people are, trying to do everything they can on an individual level to help save the environment, whether it be recycling or trying to use less energy or biking to work. I mean, a person, and when you look at the numbers, it's astounding. So, for instance, a person, if their average commute was, say, 15 miles, right? Um, the average person would have to commute to work for 7 years in order to offset the amount of fuel that a fighter jet uses in 1 hour. And to me, that puts a huge perspective on, that the efforts of individuals can be so undermined by war and militarism, and the drive of some people to use war as a way to control and make money. And as many people in the military know, that's oftentimes what it all boils down to. So, for instance, I was working and organizing in Vermont for the first 10 years or so of my time in the peace movement. And there was a huge effort to make idling your vehicles illegal, to ban it. And that makes sense because then you're polluting and it's there with no purpose. You're not driving anywhere, you're not going anywhere. And then unfortunately, the congressional delegation in Vermont, to include Leahy and Sanders and the Representative Welsh, lobbied to get the F-35 based in Vermont in order to save the Air Guard's mission. And now in Vermont, they have, I think, 23 F-35s flying overhead that has, been billed as a weapon system to defend us. But in actuality, it's a weapon system that is designed to annihilate an opponent. And so, it's interesting the language and how we use this language of defense, and so much has been billed as in the best interests of our national defense. But what does that really mean when you're talking about things from an ethical standpoint? And I think that we're all still trying to figure out ethics. I think it's a lifelong learning process, but what I don't think is that there's any question that ethics would have us treat one another, the world, and all beings on it in an ethical manner, in a kind and compassionate manner. And that requires us interacting as humans without technology intervening. So one other example, and we do in Veterans for Peace, there's a long tradition and history of pushing for denuclearization, for wanting to end the use of drones. I've spoken out about surveillance programs, and others have as well. And, we have the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project. But another really interesting endeavor that has been just kind of emerged over the past 3 or 4 months is an initiative called Gamers for Peace. And that is members, peace activists, veterans, not even just veterans, but people in the gaming world who are interested in topics of peace and social justice, to have a space online through Discord and Twitch and all manner of social media that kind of evades me. But but to have a space where they can bring the topics of peace and social justice to that environment. And it's really important for a couple reasons. So particularly during the pandemic, but since the last, I would say 5, 6 years, the military has increasingly decided to go into spaces online where they know kids are. And I find it rather disturbing and in many ways perverse that recruiters and the US military are allowed into space online where they can essentially groom children to join the military. And you can say children because they're in spaces that are for suitable for anyone from 13 years old on up. So there's no way for parents to intervene. There's no way for there to be kind of a more family-oriented discussion that recruiters, knowing that kids were increasingly in this online space, decided to take their recruiting efforts to these spaces as well, to include increasing numbers of ads for military, to join the military service. And again, this is in spaces that are geared towards an audience of 13 years and older. So that to me has also, an ethical quandary in terms of how our government is using technology to impact and intervene into our lives. And don't we have, or shouldn't we have, privacy from that? I remember a few years ago when I was talking about surveillance, and this was also in the midst of the Bush administration classifying pretty much anything and everything that they did. I would have people say, well, if you want privacy, shouldn't the government also be able to have its own privacy? And, the government is an entity that is meant to work on the behalf of and at the behest of the public. And the government is supposed to be transparent, whereas people as individuals have always been or striven to ensure that their privacy was protected. So I know that we will have some additional time, but I think that is where I can add my contributions for the moment. For people interested in learning more about Veterans for Peace, we have a website, veteransforpeace.org. It is, from what I am told, archaic because it was built 10 years ago, and we are in the midst of overhauling our website to make it more easily digestible and easier to find information. But there are people above my pay grade who are working on that.